Well, hello, my name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. Welcome to my channel if you're returning, and welcome equally if you are visiting me for the first time. Welcome to my lovely little library. So I sometimes, I'll get my words out in a minute. Every now and then there are books that really kind of come into your life unexpectedly and affect you and lead to you sort of going down various sort of rabbit holes of interest. And earlier on, no, not earlier on this year, towards the end of last year, I was lucky enough to go to Wales and visit the wonderful Rhugylch, where Mike Parker, who's an author, lives, and he wrote a book called On the Red Hill, which I'd absolutely adored, and it was lovely to be able to get to meet Mike and find out a bit more about him. But while I was with him, he recommended a book to me, and I was really, really surprised that I hadn't heard about this book before, and immediately got hold of a copy. But I've only read it in the last week, and actually I sat down and read it in a whole day. And this is a book called Where, I don't know if you can see, and it's written by a guy called Simon Moreton. And on the front of this book, you can probably make out there's a hill there, and that hill is called the Clee. Clee meaning, I think, hill in Welsh probably, or I don't know, is it old Shropshire dialect for hill? And I live on the in Shropshire, which is sort of on the border between, well, right near the border between England and Wales, and it has this sort of very kind of timeless quality to it. It's quite a quiet county. It's very beautiful, very rural, and I feel, you know, extremely privileged to live in this landscape. And I can see this hill all the time, wherever I go locally, and whenever we've been away and we drive back home, we kind of head towards this wonderful hill. It's a fantastic landmark, and there's something quite sort of primeval about the way it rises out of the landscape as well. So I didn't realise that this whole book had been written about the Clee. Now, Simon Moreton in this book, it's non-fiction, by the way, so he's and it is, I think, well, we can't call it a graphic novel because it's non-fiction, but it's certainly a graphic book. It's illustrated with these very sort of, I mean, Simon doesn't claim to be an artist, but actually there's something wonderful about the naivety of his illustrations, I think. And I've always been fascinated by that relationship between words and pictures. I used to absolutely love reading storybooks to my children when they were younger, and you know, the way that the pictures, if it's done well, just enhance the story that's being told. So this book works in two ways. So first of all, it's an account of Simon's experience of his father, who he clearly loved very much, sort of being present during the demise of his father and death, and of cancer. And, you know, for anybody who's been through that kind of experience, the way that Simon writes about it is so honest and so thoughtful. That's one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book. And, you know, I've mentioned this before, that I think as a society, certainly, you know, living in England, I don't think we're very honest about death. I don't think we talk about it very much, and I think it, you know, that is not a good thing. So I really was grateful to Simon for exploring death in the way that he does, and not sort of keeping anything out, you know, being very sort of it's the way he talks about his feelings and what it's like to watch somebody that you love, and also who is of a, you know, somebody who you've kind of respected all your life, and watching them sort of gradually disappear, really. So he writes about that really well. And he also writes about the Clee because I think it was for about 10 years during his childhood, he lived on the slopes of the Clee in a little village, and his father worked on the top of the Clee. There's what we call in our family a giant onion, or I know other people call it a giant golf ball. It's actually called a radome. I learnt that through reading this book. But Simon's father also spends time on the Clee because that's his job, to go and look after the radio station up there. So Simon experienced the Clee for many years as a child, going up there with his father in all sorts of weather conditions, but also seems to somehow keep returning to it. So, you know, there are many, many times when he seems to revisit the Clee. And I love that whole idea of the way that a geography can kind of grip and hold you. And I think he writes about that really well as well. But for me personally, one of the most exciting things about this book was the fact that it opened my eyes to the local history in a way that I've just felt so ignorant. You know, I walk up there regularly. I love being up on that hillside, but I didn't know half the history of it. And the day I finished reading the book, I've got a very long-suffering friend who I go walking with every week, and we often go up the Clee, and I'd read in here about this amazing it had been a kind of squatter's hovel, which was turned into what can loosely be called a farm, and then the Victorians, in the Victorian era, the farmer, the owner, developed it, changed it into a very rudimentary bathhouse, and started people from anywhere and everywhere could come up the Clee to go and bathe in the waters from this spring, which was supposed to be like Malvern water, which is one of the sort of big spa towns in Britain. But what I loved about it was that his motive for doing it seems to have been purely philanthropical. He didn't charge for the privilege, or at least he only charged the rich to cover the cost of cleaning it if they had enough money to contribute. And I thought, blimey, I've been up there so many times I didn't even know this place existed. So last Wednesday night, I dragged my friend up there in the dark. We were very silly, really, because we'd forgotten to take our head torches, which we normally do. So it was clambering around on all these rocks in the dark, trying to find this place, because the way that he'd described it and the way he'd sort of filled those gaps in my knowledge had really affected me, and I wanted to see it for myself. And we did find it. But we're going to go back when the light's better so that we can explore it properly. And I think, you know, what I'm trying to sort of get to the bottom of here is the way that books can have such a hold over you that you want to visit the places that are mentioned in them. You want to, you know, and often when I go somewhere, I want to read a novel that's set there, or quite often I've read a novel where the setting has had such an effect on me that I've wanted to go to that place. And I don't, you know, I think it's really interesting that in my mind there's a real connection between reading and travel and that desire to see the world in all its different forms. So I don't really know what genre of book this is. I really couldn't decide. You've got these lovely, you really feel like you get to know Simon as well. I really like that he's sort of let us into his world, because he's reflecting on his childhood. So you've got, you know, extracts from things that he wrote when he was a kid at school, and some way, you know, there's his various school reports. You get snapshots of newspaper entries, and the Clee itself, you know, absolutely fascinating history of the sort of the mining and the quarrying and all those sorts of things that have affected the landscape as well. So while I don't know, you know, I would really recommend this book. I think it's got a particular resonance for me, I can't lie, because of where I live. But it also made me think about how often do we actually sit down and read books about the places that we know and love and are familiar to us. So I'm very, very grateful. And I love the title Where, because of course he's thinking about place, but he's also thinking about, you know, what happens after somebody dies, where have they gone, you know, that whole sort of hideous aftermath of death, when you know, for me certainly, because I'm an atheist, and that you know, that question about that, the sort of finality potentially of death, and it just got me thinking about graphic novels in general. And it's not a genre that I know very well, and yet whenever I've read a graphic novel, it's always had a real impact on me. So I was looking through my shelf to see what I could find, and I've got very, very few. And yet when I was a child, things like Tintin, I absolutely loved Tintin. It used to make me howl with laughter. And Asterix, I'm sure, you know, there's a connection between reading Asterix and becoming a classicist. But one of the things I did, well, there were two books that I found that I realised, again, had a real sort of resonance for me right now and for society, I think. And so if you've not come across them, I really recommend them. So the first one is Safe Area Gorazde by Joe Sacco. And this one also, I think it was published in about 2000 and won all sorts of awards. Gorazde was an enclave during the Bosnian War in the 1990s, so from 92 to 95, or 6 even. Joe Sacco goes out and kind of, I would say chronicles, but it's not as simple as that. He meets the people who, and also spends time there himself during the war, and just basically seems to bombard them with questions, and the answers to the questions form the text. And one of the things that really strikes me about this is that the images, I mean, I know when you're reading a book, normally you build, well, I do, not everybody does actually, do they? Not everybody can visualize, but we kind of build these pictures and these memories in our heads. But I think when you're presented with the images themselves, I mean, so many of these images are really resonating with me right now, because we've had that horrendous earthquake that's happened in Turkey and Syria. And a lot of the images in this book are reminiscent of natural disaster. I'm just trying to find an example. So you've got, and I'm sorry, some of these images are very hard hitting, but we've got images of men being led out of Gorazde there. We've got, images of sort of mass graves, and a lot of the images in this book have really stayed with me. And what it helped, and you know, this is a humanitarian disaster, but this was a disaster of our own making. You know, it was caused by the inability of different sections of the community to actually sort of work together, and all the sort of the old problems that we've had as human beings for centuries with prejudice and so on. So it, you know, the sort of the scale of it, I think, the scale of any sort of catastrophe, for some reason, I think it can be explained very well in pictures. And Joe Sacco puts himself into this text as well, in a way that, you know, he's there asking questions, he's there watching in the pictures. There's a chap called Erdin who is the main sort of subject of the text, who he interviews, Edin, sorry, not Erdin. And the text starts with well, it doesn't quite start, there's some preamble as well to set the scene, but this page really, really moves me, because Edin is saying, I spent a very nice childhood, and he describes that when he was growing up, I didn't make any distinction between Serb, Croat and Muslim children. We were always together, fishing in the forest and the playground and the stadium. And then the forest and the playground and the stadium become these horrific, you know, backdrops for human horror. And it's that whole sort of, you know, I mean, I find this kind of thing absolutely incomprehensible. And what the book tries to do is to unpick that and try to sort of tell a really honest story of what that looks like, that kind of suffering from the inside. So I think, you know, I think graphic novels have a lot to offer. Another one that I read and really appreciated. It's difficult to say enjoyed because, you know, the subject matter of this one is really grim as well. But it's Illegal by Eoin Colfer, who wrote the Artemis Fowl books, and Andrew Donkin, I think, illustrated them. So it's a team that have worked together before with illustration and images. And again, if you haven't read this, it's a very, very honest, quite grueling account of a little boy who his sister is taken. He's growing up in Ghana. His sister's taken. His brother disappears to go and try and find her. And that's what I think he's called Kwame, the little boy. Sorry, it's a while since I read it. Oh, it's going to annoy me now. I'm pretty sure he's called Kwame. But anyway, the little boy, I think he's only about 10 years old. And he embarks on this journey to find his brother and to find his sister, which takes him from Ghana across through Niger across the Sahara, and then, you know, overseas to finally arrive in Italy. And again, it really explains that whole horror of being a refugee and of sort of being driven to sort of try and find people in your life who've he's got nobody else, you know. He's in many ways he doesn't have a choice, and that although it is again a fictional account, every single moment in the story is based on interviews that Eoin Colfer and Andrew Donkin did with actual refugees. So the story is created out of witness testimony of people who've made that similar journey from Central Africa across to the West. So yeah, I suppose one of the reasons that I wanted to do this tonight was because I would really like some recommendations myself. I do feel that this kind of graphic literature is something that I'm really ignorant about, and yet whenever I read anything like this, it does seem to have a profound effect on me. So yeah, I'm really, really open to recommendations, please. I'm going to try and read more of these things over the next few months, and I'd love some suggestions. So anyway, there we are. That's my ramblings, all sparked off by that lovely book, Where Life and Death in the Shropshire Hills, and just thinking about the importance of place, and also how, for some reason, graphic novels can really educate and help you to empathise with the situations of people who are very far removed from your own experience. Anyway, there we are. Bit of a bleak subject, I know, but an important one, I think. Take care, everybody. Bye.